Many things in life can confuse us, but the one thing that confuses me that I'd like to share today is why does the news only share mostly bad news? Why don't we get good news? I remember Peter Mansurridge many years ago had said, and he worked for CBC, he was saying that if the news broadcasted good news, there wouldn't be enough time in a day to share everything. But there's something about, and maybe it's because we often, if we think about it as human beings, we really get stuck with negative thoughts. They're really hard to actually stop. And positive thoughts just seem to float by. And even if somebody compliments us, we often brush that off. But maybe we need to highlight those moments, because who's to say that's not the voice of God speaking through that person and that little bit of encouragement that we need. There's many things in our gospel reading that we might be confused by, or sometimes even in the Old Testament, we'd be confused by many things. The first thing we ought to be confused by is why was John the Baptist, the son of a priest, who he has to function as a priest, why is he not in the temple? Now, this is part of John's character. He's always reacting against, people, and he's reacting actually against King Herod. Now, of course, there was King Herod the Great, who began the renovation of the temple. Then there's King Herod of Antipas, who's the one that beheaded John. So he's like, I don't want any part of that. Those guys are involved in that. But he's really doing the same action of a priest, but he's not offering an animal sacrifice. Many times in the Old Testament, God is trying to steer the people away from doing animal sacrifices because he wants a humble and contrite heart. So John is baptizing people as a priest, as the son of a priest. Now the second thing is, why does Jesus accept baptism? Remember, this is not a baptism like you and I experience. This is a baptism of repentance and forgiveness of sins. Jesus doesn't need to turn away from sin and turn to God. Doesn't need forgiveness of sin. So why does he accept this? And I'm going to use a play on words. Is atonement. And the play on words is at one with men and women, at one with us. Jesus is at one with sinners. And he does this when he accepts death on the cross, because, he accepts, even prior to this, when he washes the feet of the disciples, that he accepts the role of slaves, at one with slaves. And then he accepts being accused of being a slave who's committed a crime, at one with criminals who were slaves that committed a crime. And constantly, even working as a carpenter's son, he's at one with workers. So oftentimes Jesus is at one with us and continues to be at one with us. And what a blessing, what a grace it is. Now, in the first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah, we have this servant. The servant who is going to be of God and also carry out God's mission. Of course, Jesus fulfills this. Jesus is the servant, with whom God delights, or who God is pleased with. And so often we fail to recognize that God is pleased with us. Of course, God doesn't want us to sin, obviously, but there's many times when God is pleased with us. And we need to really absorb that into our hearts. But this servant is going to be powerful. I mean, this is the Son of God we're talking about in the person of Jesus, and yet is going to be tender and is going to care for others. This is what Jesus did. And then it's going to bring sight to the blind. And this is more of a spiritual blindness. Jesus faced spiritual blindness. Those who could not recognize him, but many people did recognize him. But even for ourselves, I often believe that whatever is going on in the inside of my inner being is what I see on the outside. If I have peace on the inside, I will see peace on the outside. And if I have a good perspective on the inside, I will have a good perspective as I look outside. And then Jesus is going to be the one to set captives free. He's going to set us free of things that capture us, that's not good for us. He's going to be at one with us so that he can offer grace and offer presence to help us to let go of these things, to ask for forgiveness when we need to, receive grace when we need to be with us. And so as we gather around the table, Lord, atonement, Jesus the Christ is once again at one with us. And what a blessing it is, so that we can be encouraged to be at one with one another as we bring forth the good news of the love of God found in Jesus Christ.